Walter Payton is arguably the greatest running back ever in the NFL, like the Chicago Bears. He's in the Hall of Fame, and sports figures are notorious for all their statistics and keeping records of everything that's done. And after they added up his career, they determined that he had run a total of 9 miles as a running back. It's a long way to run. The opposition that they run against in the NFL ran 9 miles in his career. But he was also, his average run was 4.4 miles. So he ran 9 miles, 4.4 miles at a time. He wasn't a cross-country runner. So every 4.4 miles, he was tackled or knocked down. And yet he ended up running 9 miles, 4 yards at a time. It's the way you live for God, really. You don't live for Him 9 miles at a time. You live for Him 4.4 yards at a time. And you get knocked down, and you get yourself back up, and you run another 4.4 yards. In the very end, when it's over with, hopefully you have run enough in your race to have accomplished something for the kingdom of God. The idea that actually Walter Payton probably got up more than he ran. Every 4.4 yards, he finds himself getting up off the ground again. He's in the Hall of Fame, not for running 9 miles, but for getting up every 4.4 miles. He was willing to get up and take the ball again and run his race again. Talk about the Lord in terms of being near us or far away from us. We have a feeling that God is near us. Or I just want to make this point, that God is either near us or He's far away from us. And I know that you know there's no such thing as that. There's no place that God is not. Right. God is everywhere. He is omnipresent. He is spirit. He is pure spirit. And spirit is not matter. Matter takes up space like you and I. We take up space. God does not take up space because He's not matter. He is pure spirit. In my opinion, the thing that makes us closer to Him, or to seem closer to Him, or to seem far away from Him. And the Bible does talk about being close and far. The Bible said concerning the Pharisees, they drew near to Him with their mouth, their lips, but their heart was far from Him. So they were just 12 inches from God, really, their tongue to their heart. That's not seem like very far away from God, but the Bible calls it far away. Their heart was far. How does your heart get far away from God? How could that be when God is every place? David had said, make my bed in hell, or I sit into the heavens. God, you're there. He's omnipresent. There's no place that God is not. He's just as much in this cup right here as He is in your heart. Just as much in that cup right there as there is of God anywhere. Because He is not man, He doesn't take up space, you understand. Because we can't get much of us in that place, but because we take up too much space, You'll get a pair of pants out you haven't worn for a few years. You understand you're taking up more space now than you took up then, because you are matter. God is not matter. But the thing that creates a closeness, in my opinion, that creates a close or a sense of closeness to God, or a sense that He is close to us, that there must be a sense of likeness, because the more like Him you become, the closer He feels to you. So there's a likeness that presents closeness. When you're unlike God, there's a sense of remoteness, sense that He is further away. Although He is not further away. Right. He's just as close to you as He is to any ranked center out here. There's no sense of closeness or remoteness really with God, because He is everywhere. No place that God is not. And so when there's a sense of likeness, though, there is also a sense of closeness that comes to God. I feel very close to God because right now I feel like I'm very much like Him. Well, what is God? He is spirit. And the more spiritual you become, the more like Him you become. And there's that sense of closeness, that sense of nearness. When God made man, He made him in His own, after His image and in His likeness. And because Adam and Eve were like God, He came down in the cool of the evening and fellowship with them and walked with them. They had that close, intimate relationship because they were like Him. But then when they partook of the forbidden fruit and they became unlike Him, then they were driven from his presence. But how could that be? Since he's everywhere, he's spirit, how could you ever go from the presence of God? Well, they're just not like him now. Consequently, there's that sense of remoteness as far as them being matter, him being spirit. Now there's a sense of remoteness to God. So if you want to be close to God, seek to be more like God. Because the more like him you become, the closer the sense you have of being close to God. People that are sinners that seem to be far, say, well, that person's a million miles from God. They're not a million miles from God. They're a million miles from being unlike God. And being unlike him gives that sense of him being far away. When in fact he's not far away, you're just not like him. And when you get just a little bit more like him, you become a little more spiritual. There's a sense that he's getting closer to you. He said, you draw nigh to me, as you become a little more like me, I'll become a little more like you. We'll have this relationship coming together. I want to read I'm going to try to make that fit into what I'm talking about. I'm not sure I can do that. Book of Psalms, the 90th chapter, verse 9 and 10. For all our days are passed away in thy wrath, and we spend our years as a tale that is told. The days of our years are 60 years, and 10, and by reason of strength they be 80. Yet is our strength labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off, and we fly away. The heading of this psalm is the prayer of Moses, the man of God. And in the first 3 verses, he talks of the timelessness of God, that he is before the mountains, he's before the earth, he's before the worlds were ever brought into existence. And the writer goes on to say he's from everlasting to everlasting. Thou art God, he said. For 1,000 years in thy sight are but yesterday when it is past, and as a watch in the night. God, you're eternal, and you bear no relationship to time. But man is not so. The writer says he's here on earth is very brief, and man is continually returning back to that from which he came. The writer says that man is like grass that grows up in the morning and the evening is cut down, and life here is very temporary. It's filled with trouble, iniquity, sins, wrath, anger. Perhaps you can live to be 75, and if you're strong and healthy, maybe you can push 80, but the years are soon cut off, and they just fly away. I asked myself, I turned 70 last year, November, and I've been asking myself, well, if I've learned anything, or what have I learned, if anything, in my life, what I have learned that maybe is unique to me, not what I've learned by reading. And by the way, if you don't like to read, you need to go do something else. You need to read. You need to read. I try to read a book a week, at least. You need to read. The writer finishes up the 90th Psalm in verse 15. And he said, make us glad according to the days wherein thou hast afflicted us, and the years wherein we have seen evil. He requests that God will just be just. Now God, these are hard times, struggling times, painful times. And what I want you to do, God, what I'm asking you to do is be just in this. And for every evil day, give me a glad day. And for every hard day, give me an easy day. Be just. God hates a false balance. You have to believe this now. You have to believe. If you don't believe this, you just well go do something else. You have to believe this. That God is a just God. Whatever else he is, he's a just God. That is, he hates a false scales. He hates a false set of weights. He hates a false measure. You know, they measured things out in those days, and men would lay like a pound weight over here, and then you put a pound of bologna over here, and when they got level, you knew you had a pound of bologna. What they would do is shave the weights. Call it a pound, but they would shave off some of the brass or whatever, lead, whatever it was, to make it lighter. You'd think you're getting a pound, but you really weren't because they shaved off the weight. He said he hated that, a false set of weights or a false set of scales that did not come out even. And since God is a just God, you have to believe, if you're going to survive, you have to believe that for every evil day, God will give you a good day. That's what the writer's saying. God, all I want to do is even it out. All I want to know is whatever I'm going through right now, that there will be a time that you're going to make up for that on the other side of the scales. Right. And, for all the days of uncertainty and all the days of painful and all my sorrowful days and my heartache days, and for every tear I've cried, and for all the brokenness and days of suffering and loss, Of all that, give me some glad days, God. Just give me in proportion. I want some glad days for all the bad days that you have given me. If you're going to be a just God, you can't just load the scales with heartache and despair and brokenness and weeping and tears and sorrow and downcastness. You can't just load the scales like that, God. You've got to put something on the other side because you're a just God. What I'm asking you to do, God, is just balance the scales out in my life. And for every tear I cry, give me a time to laugh. And every time you break my heart, give me a joyful heart. And for every gloomy day, give me a sunshiny day. And you know, I found that to be so. Because God is a just God. He balances out your life. Now, if you don't believe that, you're never going to survive. Because you have to have hope that God's going to put on the other side of the scales. He's going to put the blessings. He's going to put the goodness of God. He's going to put everything you need on the other side to balance your life out. If you think your life is just going to be what it is sometimes right now, there's no need in going on. No need in pressing on. Because it's too debilitating. It's too crippling. It's too much to bear. But hope is like the wind in your sails that carries you to the next arena of your life. And without that, it's very difficult to go on. And he characterizes life, the writer does, he characterizes life as a tale that is told. Life is like a story that is told. It's a series of events and happenings and experiences. It's a report of the facts of your life. It's a recital of the final outcome. It's a story of the circumstances that occurred in your life and the record of the final results. And according to the writer, every life will be composed of some bad days and some glad days. And everybody is going through one or the other. You could be going through one of your saddest days while the other person, their kids just got the Holy Ghost and your child just walked away. This person over here is having great revival and you just lost a bunch of people, you know. You're having a great time. You're booked up and this other person's struggling to get a place to preach, you know. It can be at different places in our lives. But you have to believe that whatever is going on in your life, God will balance the scales. He's going to balance things out in your life. So the writer's saying, for every evil days, all my evil days, according to the years and the days I spend that are evil, give me glad days. Balance it out, God, in my life. I remember, this is probably hard for you to believe, but I can't remember a lot of things in life, but I do remember my first grade book when I was just learning to read. And it had 6 characters and a lot of pictures in it. There was mother and father. There was a son and daughter named Dick and Jane. They had a dog named Spot and a cat named Puff. Mother, father, Dick, Jane, Spot, and Puff. That was the characters in the first book that I ever read. And underneath the picture there would be a single line. And it would say, for instance, see, Spot, chase, Puff. But the picture would be of Spot chasing Puff. So I would learn to read by looking at the picture and then reading the little line. Sometimes I didn't know what it said, but I knew what it said by looking at the picture. I could tell what it was going to say now. The picture would depict whatever the single line under it was. And I was just learning to read. But then, over a period of time, the whole book was just a snapshot of those characters. There was no plot. You don't learn anything from it because you're learning to read. You don't learn anything from the story. There's no storyline. There's no plot. There's no theme. It's just, you're just learning to read. And then I graduated to what we call storybooks. They're kind of the same thing. Oh, there is a little plot, like the 3 pigs. You know, I love that story. And there's 3 pigs and there's a wolf, and that's it. They don't have a lot to remember. But there's a plot to it, because the old wolf's going to come and, you know, blow your house down. One made his out of straw, one out of sticks, one out of bricks. And everybody ended up at the brick house, and he huffed and puffed and couldn't blow the house down. That was the moral. But it had a moral to it. My first book didn't have a moral to it. It was just I was learning to read. But then after you learn to read, then you start reading to learn. Because you're never going to learn if you don't read. So you first have to learn to read. And learning to read means there's no moral, there's no storyline, there's no theme, there's no plot. You're just learning how to read. That's the objective. Then you start learning that there is a plot, there's a theme, there's a storyline here. But yeah, story. It has a lot of pictures also. It show the big bad wolf and show the pig. It's Goldilocks and the 3 bears, something like that. It'll have the picture. And then after you learn to read, and then you begin reading to learn. You'll move into what is called a chapter book. These are the most important books in your life because you really learn to read them. And in each new chapter, you will learn something new. And the characters and names are, as you move from chapter to chapter, there'll be people move into the life in one chapter who will move out of the life in the next chapter, who will be there in one chapter, but they're gone in the next chapter. And circumstances will change as you go from chapter to chapter, because a chapter is a distinct period in a person's life. One chapter is a distinct period of time in the book. That's why they have to change chapters, goes to another chapter, because things are going to change. They're not going to be like they are in that chapter. There is a storyline, there is a plan, there is a plot, but things are changing. Unlike in the storybook, or unlike the Dick and Jane book, this book has chapters in it, and things are going to change. Now, in the storybook, the pigs and the wolves stay there throughout the whole storyline. But in this chapter, things will move out, people move in, circumstances will change, dialogue will change, the landscape will change, there'll be new problems, be new hopes. Some people that were part of the story in the first chapter will not be a part of the story in the second chapter, sad as that may be. But there is a plot, and there is a theme to it. And I think life is more like that. If you're going to live for God, you're going to preach, and you're going to do something for the kingdom of God, that you don't live your life like a storybook, but you live your life like a chapter book. And you live your life in chapters, in segments, not as a whole story, but in segments, in chapters. And you'll find out that in your ministry, there'll be people who move into your life, and the next chapter, they will move out of your life. There will be people who are very important to you in one chapter, who will have no bearing on your life in the second chapter. There'll be things that happen to you in one chapter that will totally be gone in the next chapter. There'll be things you think you can't live without in one chapter, which in fact you will have to learn to live without in the next chapter. Because you're living life as a chapter book, and there are no pictures to help you understand what the theme of your life is. But what you have to believe is that there is a plot, and there is a story here, because it's a tale that is told. And when the tale is told about your life, you will understand. Now, God said, I know the thoughts I'm thinking. The word thinking means to weave together. He says, I know what I'm thinking. I'm going to weave all this together. I'm going to weave the good times, sorrowful times, lonely times, plenty of friends times, growth times, winning times, losing times. I'm going to weave all that together. And when the end is done, that will be the tale of your life. But you will live it in chapters, and there will be no pictures to help you understand what's going on down here in all the writings that are going on. You will not understand, but your life will be like a tale that is told. That will simply be times and events, and it's important for you to remember that what you're going through right now, regardless of what that is, whatever you're going through right now, is just one chapter in your life. It is not your life. It is just one chapter in your life. I wish I could help you with the chapter, but there are no pictures in this book. This is not a picture book. You're not now learning to read. By this time, you are reading to learn. You're looking at your life, trying to learn from what I'm going through, try to learn from what I'm experiencing. Now you're not learning to read, now you are reading so you can learn. And I wish I could give you a picture, because the picture would help you understand the plot and the theme and what's going on in all this, but there are no pictures in a chapter book. This is the book that you have to have hope that God is a just God. Whatever you're going through, God will even it out. He's going to give you, if you're crying right now, He's going to give you joy. It's going to come in the morning. If your heart's broken right now, He's a heart mender and a joy giver in the morning. Amen. If you're lonely right now, He's going to give you friends in the future. If you got, in your life, people move in, people move out. That's just how it is. Yeah. I wish things would just stay the same, but they don't stay the same. That's why it's called a chapter book, because a chapter is a distinct period of time that is irrelevant to the chapter before that. It is irrelevant to the chapter after that. It is a chapter unto itself. But when God takes all the chapters and weaves them together, that's called the tale of your life. And change is a difficult thing in life to deal with. However, your spiritual and your emotional, well-being depend on being able to navigate through the transitions or change the chapters. It's very hard for some people to ever turn the page. Very difficult for them to turn the page. We don't like change. And every time you turn the page in your life, God tells you to turn the page in your life, it's change. Yeah. Something is going to happen in this chapter that did not happen in that chapter. Something is going to be different. We don't like different. We like consistency, even though it may be a little painful, at least it's predictable, because you're really just reading to learn, and you don't have any pictures. And therefore, you've got to keep reading. If you want to really learn what God is doing in your life, you can't stop reading with one stinking chapter. That's not your life. Good or bad, that's not your life. It's just one chapter in your life. It is distinct from the previous chapter. It's distinct from the chapter that is to come. But when it's all said and done, God's going to give you as many good chapters as He gave you evil chapters. Amen. And if you don't believe that, it's going to be hard for you to turn the page in your life. Things never stay the same. You don't get stuck in how things used to be and get left behind. There are more chapters to live. You can't change the past. The future is full of hope. I said, I know the thoughts I think toward you. I know what I'm thinking toward you. I'm trying to weave this together. Right. I didn't bring the evil upon your life, but if you allow me, I'll take the evil, the wicked, the heartache, the despair. I'll take all your tears and I'll weave them together in a beautiful tapestry. It may be in the next chapter, but I'll weave it all together if you allow me to do that. And you will turn the page on your life and not insist on living in one chapter of your life. Because if you insist on living in the same chapter, that will be the last chapter of your life. Last one, because you have to turn the page. Israel, the Bible said, all these things happen to them for examples. They're written for our admonition upon whom the ends of the world will come. I can do this very quickly. Israel was comfortable 400 years, living in Egypt on the fertile lands of Goshen. They were prosperous, they had good food, they multiplied. Then Pharaoh enslaved them, they cried out to God. God heard their cry, delivered them. But they could never make the transition. Their constant cry was to go back to Egypt. They cannot turn the page. Cannot turn the page. They continually want to go back to the last chapter of their lives. Melons, garlics, onions, all that kind of stuff. We remember those things. Continually wanted to go back and just keep living that last chapter of their life. In fact, they got to the very brink of Jordan, but could not turn the page. Said, let's elect us a captain. We'll call him Captain Go Back. We'll all turn around and go back in the wilderness. And they did. And they wandered in the last chapter of their life. And they all died. Until God raised a generation that was able to turn the page and go to the next chapter. Because the next chapter was full of milk and honey. They said, listen, we've come out of heartache. We've come out of despair. Our backs have been beaten. We lived in hovels. We created slime pits. We've made brick. We built towers. We built treasure cities for Pharaoh. And we built all those things. But you've got to believe that in the next chapter, God's going to make up for all that. Right. If you can just turn the page, God's going to be good to you. He's got milk and honey. He's got clusters of grapes it takes 2 men to carry. He's got a land. He's got wells you don't have to dig, houses you don't have to build, vineyards you don't have to plant. But you got to turn the page. You got to go on. You can't just linger around where you're at right now and say, oh, this is where we want. Because if you go back to the wilderness, that will be the last chapter of your life. How many men live in the last chapter of their lives? Because they will not turn the page. They will not go on to the next chapter. Because they're still learning to read. They haven't learned that you read to learn. And if you want to learn about God and what God wants for your life, you have to go on to the next chapter. So turn the page in your life. Don't ever be afraid to turn the page and go to the next chapter of your life. Or that last chapter will be the last chapter in your life. We move forward. I can do this quickly. The story of Ruth. To begin with, Ruth is not even in the first chapter. It's all about Elimelech, Naomi, Mahalion, Chilion. There's a family in Bethlehem. Go to Moab. Life is good. It's full of prosperity. Love is in the air. Everybody's getting married. But you got a couple new names introduced. I'm not talking about chapters in the Bible. I'm talking about the chapters of their life. Now you got Ruth and Orpah are introduced. And then in chapter 2 of their lives, there's nothing but heartache and death and tears and hopelessness. Their husbands die. Both sons die. It's evil days. It's sorrowful. It's a chapter of loneliness and widowhood and helplessness and friendliness in a foreign land. But in chapter 3, there's a ray of light. There's bread back home. She decides to return to Bethlehem. Her daughter-in-laws both pledged to go with her. Things change. About halfway there or so, she begins to say, you girls need to go back to the last chapter of your life. Go back to that chapter. Live in that chapter. I'm not going to have any more sons inside of me. If I had another son, would you wait around till you could marry him? They both decided. The Bible said Orpah, she decides to go back. She will not turn the page. She has no interest in the next chapter. I wonder what would happen to Orpah had she went on. I wonder what her life would have been like. Because, see, if you turn around and go back, as far as Orpah's concerned, that's the last chapter of her life. She's never heard from again. Ruth says, your God be my God, your people be my people, whether they bear me, they'll bear you. Let's turn the page, Naomi. Let's just turn the page. Let's go on and see what the next chapter is going to hold for us. And they did. And she fell in love, with a man named Boaz. It's an amazing thing that Boaz and Ruth would have ever fell in love. Because Boaz's mother was Rahab. Rahab, the harlot. She dwelt in Israel, the writer says, until that day. And Rahab married a man named Salmon, S-A-L-M-O-N, married a man named Salmon. They had a little boy named Boaz. And Ruth is a Moabite. She's a product of incest. You take a little girl that is her heritage, that is of incestuous relationship between Lot and his daughters. She's a product of incest. She marries a boy who's the son of a harlot. Guess what their kids are going to be? Halfway houses and prisons, and you got a harlot son married to a daughter of incest. What's that going to be? Well, you got to turn the page. If that's the last chapter you read right there, you're going to be disappointed in these folks. Because Boaz marries Ruth and redeems her and Naomi. They have a little son named Obed, who has a little son named Jesse, who has a little son named David. But if you don't read that chapter right there, all you're thinking about is Moab. All you're thinking about is heartache and despair. My kids are all dead. My life is gone. I'm a widow now. Just bury me in Moab. But Naomi decided to turn the page. I'm going to go on to the next chapter of my life. Orpah didn't. So she went back and lived the last chapter of her life in Moab. Never to be heard from again. So people that are willing to turn the page and go on and risk something for the future, because you're learning to read. And when you learn to read, there are no pictures to help you know what God's going to do in your life. It's called faith. Having faith in God. Having confidence in God. And so, we could talk about Lot's wife. She couldn't turn the page, Never could turn the page. And she had angels holding her hand, but Sodom held her heart. So she could never turn the page. John Greenleaf Whittier, I guess he was a poet. I don't know what else he wrote, but he wrote this line here. For all the sad words of tongue and pen, the saddest of these, it might have been. You think about what might have been if men and women would have only turned the page. Whether you talk about Judas, because one of the foundations of the New Jerusalem had to be rebuilt. And Judas failed, because the name of the apostles were going to be on one of the foundations. You think about what might have been if he'd have stayed faithful to God. You think about what it might have been for Orpah if she would have went on and turned the page, What might have been for Israel, those millions of people that turned the wilderness into a cemetery. What it might have been for their lives, their kids, their families. What might have been. The saddest words of tongue or pen. The saddest of these, what might have been. Lift our hands and love the Lord. Thank you, Jesus, for your goodness and mercy.
You're worthy.
Thank you for your amazing grace, dear God.
Glory
for
to
your
your name.
amazing grace.
Thank you, Jesus.
Thank you for your
Have your
amazing
way.
grace.
Have your way.
Thank you, Jesus.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Lord.
Thank you, Lord.
Thank you,
Thank you, Lord. Praise God. Hallelujah. Thank you, Brother Osbourn. Wasn't that awesome?
Amen.
Praise God. Thank you. Can't think of a more appropriate topic for the first of the year. How many ready for a new chapter?
Yeah.
2013.
Thank you,
It's
Jesus.
going to be a new chapter. Thank you so much, Brother Osbourn. That spoke to each of us. I know that we need to be willing to turn the page. Sometimes we
as we were praying for you, Brother Bowl, and I was thinking,